And I want to share with you this morning some thoughts on the power of 7, and all of you will know this figure. Years ago, I worked with the tourism department of our Chamber of Commerce in Americus, Georgia. You know what our biggest selling asset is in that part of Georgia is a guy named Jimmy Carter and his wife. And so we promoted Sumter County, and for all its other reasons as well. And I was still working for Habitat. I was the volunteer vice president of the Chamber of Commerce. And I learned that there was this belief that every dollar that a tourist spent in your community turned over 7 times in that community before it left the community through one of the banks or Walmart or whoever it might be that moved the money around to different places. A magical number. Everybody loved it, right? So that was a number that people really believed in. Now, nobody knows for sure whether it's 7 or not. You can actually go online today and look, and you will see people are still writing theses about it and trying to figure out what is the magic number. Different industries have different numbers. I think in the construction industry, you often find it's a 2 or a 3 or something like that. But everybody knows those dollars do spin over. Now, a few years ago, I was in Brookings, South Dakota, and I was talking about this. And I was talking with an executive director of an affiliate. And when I said the magic number and was talking about it, he reached over and put his hand on my knee and he said, "Son, I was there when that number was created." He said, "I'm a former economics professor. And it was one of my colleagues who came up with that number." And he said he spoke at some chamber event or something, a big convention, and he suggested that that was the number, and the hall emptied out while he was talking. Everybody was jumping up and running and calling back to their office and going, "7, it's a 7, start spinning things by 7. And he said, "Nobody's sure." He said, my colleague set it up. He included the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, every possible spin on that money, but nobody knows for sure what it is. So having deflated me, he then looked at me and said, "But I think with Habitat, it's probably more like a 10. And he said, think about the fact that we build a house for a person who gets in that house and her son goes to college for the first time in their family's life and graduates. He said, try to figure out where that value is." So I like to tell a couple of stories, but not before I introduce a quote from Einstein. If we had that on paper in his handwriting this morning, it'd be worth $1 million if you've seen the news. He was in Russia, apparently, and you were talking about it. I saw it this morning on the news, but years ago he was in Russia, and he didn't have the money to pay his guy that was carrying his bags up, the porter, a tip. But he had just been announced as the Nobel Prize winner or something, you know. So he wrote the guy a note and said, "Here, this is going to be worth a lot more than my tip." And the note's just sold for $1 million. So, but Einstein famously said, or maybe infamously said, because you can find out a lot of these quotes aren't real, you know. If you go online, my favorite one online is the one from that says, "You can't believe everything you read on the internet," and it's signed by Abraham Lincoln. So I think Einstein said this, but it says that not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. So those are things that we have to keep in mind. But I tell a couple of stories. So one is about a group of women in Americus, Georgia, where Habitat's headquarters were. And one of these women was named May Pearl. May Pearl moved into her little Habitat house with 4 little girls. She was a single parent. Now, the early Habitat houses used vinyl siding and really required a lot of upkeep. So we thought the families would get in and all would go well. Not so with May Pearl. May Pearl didn't keep up the lawn. May Pearl didn't keep up the house. And when things needed, it spun out of control very rapidly, which was an embarrassment because it was in a neighborhood where we built a lot of Habitat houses, and Millard Fuller, the founder, and I used to take people through that neighborhood. He said to me one time, "What do you do when you get in front of May Pearl's house to distract people from the problems that she has there?" And I'm a bird watcher, and I pointed out an ivory-billed woodpecker one time and said, look, that's the last one on earth, to get people to look away. But we had people who were working with May Pearl and trying to encourage her to fix up her house and stuff. Nothing was working until one day her neighbors came to see her, all of whom were women, all of whom were Habitat homeowners. And they marched into her house and they sat down and they said, May Pearl, we've come to talk to you about your house. And May Pearl burst into tears and said, y'all, it ain't my fault, which by the way is good English where I come from. And they said, this is the most wonderful part of it, because it's so much the Christian core of Habitat for Humanity. They said to her, oh, May Pearl, we didn't come here about fault. We came to tell you that if you want to get it fixed up, we'll help you. Is that not the Christian message in its core? We're told, not about your fault. Let's get together and fix this thing. And so they worked with her and they fixed her house up. If we were in Americus, Georgia right now, I'd tell you the story sitting in front of May Pearl's house. It's not perfect, but it's a whole lot closer to perfect than it used to be. The interesting thing was that May Pearl and all of these ladies worked for us. May Pearl actually worked up in the envelope opening part with all the mail that came in with checks and things. Some of the ladies worked. One was a receptionist and one worked as a cleanup lady. But the next thing that happened out of the blue was that May Pearl went out to our local technical college and got her GED. None of these ladies had their GEDs. And it set off a wildfire amongst them. It's like, hell, if May Pearl can do it, we can. And so I heard about it, and I called May Pearl into my office, and I wrote her a personal check for $35, which was the cost of taking the test in those days. And I said, now you tell your friends, when they bring me their passing scores, they'll get a $35 check too. I got no peace. They kept me informed of every bit of their progress. More powerfully was that one of those ladies was named Mary Cross. And until the day I retired from Habitat, Mary Cross empties garbage cans. She still does it. And she comes by and you can hear her coming down the hall talking because she's chatty and stuff. I would turn off my computer or put down the phone because when Mary Cross came, I knew I was going to get the latest report on her classes. And so I would sit and listen to her talk about it. Her dream was to start a daycare center in her Habitat home. She's going to have to work the rest of her life. She, got a late start and all that, so she's going to have to work the rest of her life. And her dream was to start this daycare center. So she was continuing to go to our technical college where she could get a 2-year diploma that would allow her to do that. So she was continuing on that path. And the other story was of a young man from Sisters, Oregon, whose name is Judah Slavskovsky. And so Judah told the story at Millard Fuller's memorial service after Millard died. And he got up and he said, I was 10 years old when Habitat found me and my family living in a house where ice grew on the walls in the wintertime. And then mold grew on those same damp walls in the summertime. Now that's Sisters, Oregon's nice place to live. It's all prettified and everything else, but there's still shacks like that there. I've seen them. And Judah said, my sisters and I were too young to help build our house, but we got to plant the apple trees in the front yard, and we've enjoyed the apples from those trees over the years. And he said, but now, today, and then he charmingly corrects himself. This is a few years ago at Millard's funeral. He says, now today, well, not exactly today, but in a few months, I'm going to graduate a doctor from Harvard University. The very best of the best. He has since graduated. The irony is that these both happened in the last week of my work with Habitat. I got an email from Mary Cross saying, please come back out to the technical college and watch me walk across that stage and get that diploma that will allow me to realize my dream of starting a daycare center. And Judah graduated from Harvard. I didn't see the actual event. Those two young men were with me. We were at another thing where they were filming every move I made. And All of a sudden, they called me into the room, and one of them hit the button on his computer, and there it was. It wasn't in real time. It had just happened. But Judah was standing there with Millard's widow next to him. He's holding his diploma. He's got a white carnation in his lapel for Millard, holding his diploma and saying, "Today I got my tool belt. Millard Fuller changed the world with his, and I'm going to change the world with mine." Well, now I'm a very emotional guy, so I burst into tears. And these guys have been trying to trap me crying on all these things. They hadn't been able to. So one of them went running and grabbed the camera and came running back. Of course, by the time he's back, I'm all dried up. I'm over it, you know. But imagine for me, who started in a classroom, for whom the reason I joined Habitat was a young woman in my class. I was teaching in a South Georgia classroom, 7th and 8th grade. No child in our school could read his or her own name. 7th and 8th grade. And this little girl says, "Why should we learn this old stuff anyway?" And I said, "Because if you get an education, you'll have a better life." She came back at me like that and said, "Yeah, that's what they told my mama." So I went to see her mama. I found them living in a shack in a cornfield. There were literally no doors, no windows, no running water, no electricity, and no hope. And I went from that place to Millard and said, "You win. I'll join up with you because I'm going to waste my life in a classroom like that." Imagine the joy for me in hearing Judah Sofkowski say he graduated as a doctor from Harvard, or just the simple, wonderful joy of hearing Mary Cross say, "I got my diploma. I'm going to be able to take care of little kids." Now you put a number on that. What number would you assign to Judah Sofkowski? What number would you assign to Mary Cross, who's going to be dealing with little kids and going to be saying, "Look, when you get up there in junior high school, you pay attention to what they're saying to you. Don't you get pregnant and drop out. You know, you keep going because that piece of paper is important." We'll never be able to put a multiplier on the impact that she will have on her community. One last story and then just a few comments. A few years ago, I was at a speaking event and had a little kid come up. He was going to introduce me the next night. He asked me a few questions and I answered them. The next night was my time to speak and he got up to introduce me. Now, I was already prepared for the fact that I was going to be introduced by a little kid, right? I was not prepared for him to say, "My name is Trinity Carrillo and I'm growing up in a Habitat house." It was like he had knocked the wind out of me. I just wasn't prepared for it. So I got up and took a few breaths before I could speak. But in my speech, I told Judah Sofkowski's story. And I got a nice standing ovation from, it was a group of young people, got a nice standing ovation from them. And I came down off the stage, and here's little Trinity. And he says, "I'm in the 8th grade, and I'm going to Duke University Law School on a full scholarship." And I'm like, "Wait, what?" And he goes, No, I'm still in the 8th grade. I got a lot of work to do, but I'm going to go to Duke University Law School on a full scholarship." And his mother stepped up and she said, "He will too." She said, "Here's our story. Habitat found us living in a shelter for abused women and children. And she said they chose us to be a family, to get a house. And then they told me about sweat equity. And they said I was going to have to help build my house. And she said, I crumpled like a dried leaf because my husband had always said to me, 'You're nothing, you are nobody. You can't learn anything, you can't do anything.'" And she said, when they told me I had to help build the house, I didn't know how I was going to do it. And she raised her fist and she said, "Then Habitat put that hammer in my hand and taught me how to use it. And as I built my house, I built myself. I went back and got my GED. I got a 4-year college degree. And that boy right there, he's going to go to Duke University Law School on a full scholarship." Now, if that can happen for one person, what happens in your company? When your employees are out there helping build a Habitat house, or work with My House, or work with, there's so many wonderful organizations here, I won't remember everybody's name, represented here that do things to help provide housing and provide a decent life for other people. Imagine what's happening inside of those employees. Now, if you want to put an economic factor on it, there are two names to remember: Lowe's and Home Depot. Two huge partners of Habitat for Humanity. You know why they love us? Because we teach ordinary folks to swing hammers. And then they come to Home Depot and Lowe's and buy their materials and take them home and improve their own house. And that's just one aspect of it. Imagine what's happening inside of people. Imagining what's happening inside of a young man or a young woman. I meet them all the time. Well, I'd love to come out to Habitat, but I don't know anything about building. We teach you how to build. But imagine that learning process. Imagine what's going on inside of them. Last night I spoke to a church group and I talked about what's happening in some of the souls of people. Men who are holding on to a hammer, who are not sure about the message we preach because it's a hard message. There's this thing about a virgin birth and a guy walking out of a tomb. None of us have experienced that. So it's a hard message to grasp. But when they're holding that hammer and they're nailing and they're thinking, if this hammer is true, nail true, board true, house true, maybe if this much is true, then all the rest of it is true too. I can tell you it was my own experience. It was building houses in Africa and being a part of creating on a desert hillside a community. Literally being brought to my knees one day and thinking, I got to be a part of this. But it builds your community, and if it builds the employees as they build, if it builds you as you build, and it builds your community, imagine that you can indeed have the beloved community that we're told about in the gospel. And if I can stretch this just a little further with your patience, there is a story at the end of the scriptures. If you read the one-year Bible as I do, it's coming up in the next few weeks. It's about a beautiful city that's coming down out of the sky. And it's built of jewels and all kinds of wonderful, rich things. That is what's happening as we're building here on earth. While we build, God builds. And we will be lifted from that place of common board and cement block and those things into this city that God loves and believes. And we can reproduce that right here on earth in Holland, Michigan, as we take in our hands the mission of making housing affordable for all of our citizens. I know that you need housing for people who you want to hire to come into this community, good middle-class folks and above that. But when you think about it and own the whole mission and say, let's make it possible for everybody. Because as long as one person is living in your community, under a bridge or in the back seat of a car, you as a community are not decently housed. So I encourage you to, and I want you to do this. I want you to hold the feet to the fire of this gentleman right here and that lady back there and this guy right here and anybody else who represents one of these housing organizations and says, you know what it's time to do? It's time to sit down and come up with a plan that we work together on. They're already doing some great things together. But let's figure out how we make this happen and make Holland, Michigan, a place that God would be proud to live. Thank you for all that you do. Thank you for the hard work that you do every day in the ways that you work to make this a great community, to make our country a great country. God bless you and keep up the great work. Amen.
Thank you, Clive. And I get to spend 3 days with this guy. It's pretty nice, I'll tell you. Right after we get done here, if anybody's interested in asking Clive some questions and things like that, we've got the room for a little while. Please stick around, and Clive will be around to talk with you. I'm Don Wilkinson. I'm the Executive Director of Lakeshore Habitat, and I love what I do. It's a whole lot of fun, and the people that I get to meet. One thing we'd like to ask of you before you leave, on your table is this little green card called Get Connected. A lot of your organizations work with Habitat, and we appreciate that, but we'd like to know a little bit more. There's 3 things on there that you're interested in taking a 2-before tour. One of the things that we offer is over lunch, we'll provide you some sandwiches. You can bring people from your office or your business, and we'll just drive you around Holland and show you what all the things that Habitat has done locally, a chance to see what's going on. It's a good team building exercise for sure. If you're interested in volunteering, you can check that box either as a group or an individual, and you can either volunteer on a construction site or the restore. And then if you're interested in supporting Habitat financially, please check that box. And I'd like for everybody to please check that box. But we'd like to know who all's here. And we also know that you might not be the right person that you want us calling, but you want to be involved with Habitat. So we've left a spot down there. If there's somebody in your organization that's the person that you would like us to reach out to, please put their name on there as well. Just a couple of quick things about what's going on with Habitat in the community right now. This year we've completed 4 houses, actually getting ready to close on 2 of those houses in November. We're building, we built 1 house in Finnville, so that's 5. We're building another house in Finnville for a family of 9, which has been a challenge to make that affordable, but we're doing it. And we'd really like to start on 3 more houses before the fall, the cold weather hits, which is not too far away, Jerry. Just keep that in mind. Jerry's our construction director, so but we need to get some foundations in the ground for those. And so this spring we will actually complete our 150th Habitat home, and so we're pretty excited. We've been here for 27 years, and we're pretty excited about that. But I'd really like to tell you a little bit more about what we're doing for the future. Habitat's been working with several different organizations in the area, and we're trying to figure out how to develop a mixed income community. And we know that those communities thrive. We know that if we had 20 acres, we wouldn't be wise to build 20 acres worth of Habitat houses, but to have a nice mixed income community, and we're actually launching our first one of those, or our first trial at that this spring. If you saw the Holland Sentinel last Saturday, we've partnered with Good Sam and Capital for Compassion, Corey Sandwick and GDK, and we're building an apartment building in Zeeland over on State Street. So we're pretty excited about that. It'll be a 4-plex, and the whole idea is that people that come through the Good Sam program will live there, take their Circles program, and then they'll come into the Habitat program, and they'll be there for another year while we take them through our financial classes and everything, and then they will go out and have their Habitat house built for them. So Habitat homeowners have to put in sweat equity. They also, when they're done, they end up with a 0% mortgage that they pay back. They have to have some down payment to get a house. So it's a hand up, it's not a handout, but it's a way to break the cycle of generational poverty. And I just want to wrap up with a story. Just a couple of months ago, I was one of my favorite things to do is actually sit in the title office and do a closing on a house. And so I'm in there with a single mom who'd been in the program for a year, never picked up a hammer before, but now she feels empowered to do that because we taught her how to do that. And she had a son who was very shy. But as we were going through this process, she, the title officer told her what her monthly payment was going to be, and she started crying just uncontrollably. Now, I'm a guy. That makes me real uncomfortable. And I'm sure all you guys are the same way. And I'm sitting there going, okay, so I've got a hanky. You know, I'm 50 years old here. I'll give that to her maybe, you know. But when she finally got her composure, she took a deep breath and she said, my house payment is $300 less than what my rent payment was. Now, that's a house payment that includes her taxes, her insurance, and her house. So it was worth $300 to her. The thing that she didn't realize is that that was going to allow her to maybe buy a more reliable car. It was going to allow her to shop a little more often locally. But the other thing that she didn't realize is that her 9-year-old son is going to have a 50% better chance of graduating from high school. He's going to have a 119% better chance of going to college. And on top of that, children of Habitat homeowners typically buy their first house within 6 years after moving out of their Habitat house. So that's how we break the cycle of generational poverty. These families now have an asset. They're able to start building wealth and start building equity. And the Harvard Joint Center for Housing still says the #1 way for people to build wealth in the United States is to own their own home. And so this is a possibility for that. So with that, we want to thank you guys all for coming. We really appreciate you being here. We appreciate your support. We've got a lot more to do along the lake shore, and we really want your help in doing that. So thank you very much for coming.